Good. Well, thank you all for coming today, and welcome to our SysMech-sponsored, NES-sponsored, CMES-sponsored ad hoc target of opportunity lecture by Dr. Stephen Zunes, who I think it's fair to say is probably the person who has thought and written and analyzed the most about the role of nonviolent protest, nonviolent strategy in the Middle East. And Stephen Zunes is professor of politics and chair of Middle Eastern Studies at the University of San Francisco. He serves as senior analyst for foreign policy in focus and is the chair of the academic advisory committee of the International Center on Nonviolent Conflict. His most recent books include Western Sahara, War, Nationalism, and Conflict Irresolution. Also Tinderbox, U.S. Middle East Policy and the Roots of Terrorism, and an edited volume that's pretty seminal in the field on nonviolent social movements. So it's a wonderful opportunity to have him here right at this very moment where we are all, for the last couple of months, I guess, thinking and talking about the role of nonviolent strategy explicitly in the Egyptian revolution and implicitly as the basis for everything that's going on in the Middle East in these last tumultuous weeks. And I think it's especially opportune to talk about it with someone who is both an expert on nonviolence itself, but also has written about the roots of terrorism and its relationship to Middle East policy. So hopefully we can take a lot of the things that we've been discussing in the SysMech community and in the NES community over the last few weeks, put them all together and take advantage of Dr. Stephen Zunes. So thank you very much. Go ahead. Here, I'll put this on you.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I mean, any of us in the field of Middle East studies know that Tucson is really the place to go at some point in your career, given the wonderful legacy you all have here in the study of the region. Just a couple logistical things real quick. I have a grant actually that helps distribute some material on this topic, including a recently published book which came out before all the excitement of the recent months called Civilian Jihad, Nonviolent Struggle, Democratization, and Governance in the Middle East, edited by Maria Stephan. It's from Palgrave Macmillan. A couple dozen fascinating chapters of dealing with addressing these kinds of issues. I have a few available here. If you don't get one as you leave, at some point we can pass around a sheet. If you can leave your address, mailing address, and I will try to get one to you. Also, I have some copies of my own book, which has a couple chapters in the Middle East, so it looks at the phenomenon more generally. In addition, some of you know are already on it, but I have an email list where I send out articles of mine as they are posted on the web once or twice a month. So if someone could also pass out a sheet where you can clearly write your email address if you want to be on that. But anyway, thanks for coming out. I'm just merely amazed at the turnout, given that it's Friday afternoon, in fact, Good Friday. And I think it really underscores just that we are living in a really exciting time. It's kind of like being an Eastern European specialist in 1989. It's just so much is happening, so much is changing, and as you know, and in many ways, there are, unfortunately, at least in some segments of our field, as you know, there's always been this assumption that you don't really have to know anything about civil society in these countries because it doesn't really exist. What's important is the elites at the top, or the military, or maybe certain elite oppositionists, or one kind or another. kind of the equivalent of the criminologist during the Cold War who said all you need to know about Eastern Europe is what order people are on the reviewing stand during the May Day parade. But as we saw in Eastern Europe, as we're seeing in the Middle East now, things are a lot more complicated than that, and that people do make a difference. And I think that's really really critical. And while there will undoubtedly have to be additional popular struggle in both Egypt and Tunisia to ensure that the overthrow of the dictatorships in those countries lead to real democracy, the ouster of the Ben Ali and Mubarak regimes I believe, are major triumphs for the peoples of those countries, and yet another example of the power of strategic nonviolent action. Egypt and Tunisia joined such diverse countries as Philippines, Poland, Chile, Czechoslovakia, Nepal, Bolivia, Serbia, Indonesia, and others whose authoritarian regimes were replaced, were thrown out, and led to more open democratic governance as a result of such unarmed civil insurrection. And of course, the question that I've been getting a lot, and I'm sure some of you have as well, is who's responsible for these for the Tunisian and Egyptian revolutions? And I think the answer is pretty straightforward. It's millions of ordinary Tunisians and Egyptians, men and women, Christian and Muslim, young and old, workers and intellectuals, poor and middle class, secular and religious, who faced down the tear gas and the water cannons and the bullets and the goon squads, and truncheons, for their freedom. And it was not the militaries that were responsible. While there, some top military officers did ease Mubarak aside on February 11th, it was more of a coup de grace than a coup d'etat. The military brass, seeing the popular reaction to Mubarak's non-resignation speech the day before, recognized that if they didn't ease him out, they could very well be taken out with him. And the army's refusal to engage in a Tiananmen Square-style massacre in Tahrir Square was not because the Egyptians were on the protester side. Indeed, as many of you know, the military was the bulwark of Mubarak's regime. Mubarak himself was head of the Air Force prior to becoming Saddam's vice president. But because the military leadership could not trust their own soldiers, disproportionately from the poor and middle class, to fire on their own people. Similar, Ben Ali fled Tunisia because the military officers who he ordered to attack the hundreds of thousands of protesters on Bourguiba Boulevard said, "You're not going to do that. We can't do that." And that was when he decided that the time was to go. It's important that it was not the United States that was responsible. I mean, it's amazing. I heard this debate on the radio between someone saying, well, Bush was responsible because it was pro-democracy agenda. These Arabs had no idea about being democratic until Bush inspired them. Though a little footnote, some of you may know, Kafaya actually grew out of the main young youthful opposition group in Egypt, grew out of a left-wing student movement that was organized in 2002 against the U.S. invasion of Iraq. So I guess in one way you could say maybe Bush does share some of the credit, but I think in a different way than some of his supporters might want to think. So that was one side of the other side of it. It was Obama and his speech in Cairo, the previous year. But the fact is that the United States has never been a big supporter of democracy in Egypt. $70 billion to prop up the Mubarak regime over the years. The real failure. Bush talked about spreading democracy from Damascus to Tehran, but he didn't talk about spreading democracy from Tunis to Cairo or Sana'a or Manama or any number of other countries that are allied with the United States. But the and it was interesting. Both Tunisia and Egypt, you saw the United States go from outright support to the regime to making vague statements about reform from within, and then urging both sides to